The Forgotten Warning. 2,000 years ago, Rome was the center of the world, a vast, rich empire full of conquests, but also marked by excesses, luxury, and moral decay. In the midst of this scenario, a Stoic philosopher named Lucius Annaeus Seneca raised his voice against what everyone around him treated as normal, the unbridled pursuit of pleasure. While the city indulged in endless banquets, cruel games, and limitless orgies, he warned, "Unmeasured pleasures lead to ruin." This warning was not rhetorical. It was the analysis of a man who observed how even the most powerful emperors became slaves to their desires. Seneca knew that the true danger to an empire came not only from external enemies, but from the internal decay caused by the incessant pursuit of pleasure. And if at that time he denounced the vices that corroded the soul of Rome, imagine what he would say today, seeing millions of men prisoners of something even more insidious: pornography, available on any screen, at any time, in unlimited doses. What you are going to hear in this video is more than history. It's a mirror, because the problems that destroyed empires are the same that today destroy ordinary men in silence. If the Romans got lost in excesses, we get lost in clicks. If they wasted their lives in orgies, we waste them in hours in front of screens. The essence is the same: immediate pleasure that promises relief, but charges freedom. Here, I want you to understand from the beginning the route we are going to take. First, let's remember who Seneca was, not as a name lost in books, but as a man of flesh and blood, advisor to emperors, someone who knew the power games and the dangers of desire from the inside. Next, let's dive into his vision of pleasure, something that seduces with sweetness but kills with hidden poison. Then, let's bring this concept to the current reality, showing how pornography is the perfect example of the unmeasured pleasure that he condemned. You will realize throughout the episode that for Seneca, the greatest enemy of man was never what came from the outside, but what he himself fueled from within. Unbridled desire, undisciplined lust, the impulse transformed into habit. This is what he called true slavery. And when we look at our generation, dominated by digital vices, anxious, tired, always looking for more stimuli, we see that his words are more relevant today than ever. And make no mistake, Seneca did not speak as a moralist distant from reality. He knew from his own experience the weight of pleasures. He was surrounded by power, wealth, and temptations. But instead of getting lost in them, he chose to write about virtue, discipline, and inner freedom. And it is precisely this choice that makes his words so powerful. He did not speak only with the mind, he spoke with life. Therefore, in this video, we will use Seneca's wisdom as a lens to see our time. We will understand that pornography is not a modern detail, but the clearest portrait of what he warned. A pleasure that starts small, but always demands more. That promises freedom, but imprisons. That seems sweet, but destroys. And before we continue, I want you to do two things. First, subscribe to the channel now. This daily series is like Seneca's voice whispering in your ear every day, reminding you not to get lost. Each episode is a new tool for your fight. And second, reflect deeply with me. How many times have you felt deceived by immediate pleasure? How many times have you sought quick relief and then felt even more empty, weaker, more regretful? Maybe you already know the answer. Maybe you have felt this emptiness so many times that you can't even count, but know that you are not alone. Thousands of men around the world are awakening to this truth. Unmeasured pleasure is a poison. And if you have come this far, it is because you are ready to hear this forgotten warning and transform your life before it is too late. Today, we will walk together through Seneca's words as if he were alive, looking at you, facing this generation and repeating, "Nothing is enough for whom enough is too little." It is up to you to decide whether you will continue to feed the emptiness or whether you will begin to tread the path of virtue. Who was Seneca? Before we dive into the teachings, it is necessary to understand who the man behind the words was. Lucius Annaeus. Seneca was born in Cordoba in Hispania, but grew up in Rome, the beating heart of the empire. He was educated in philosophy, the arts, and discourse, and from an early age stood out for his intelligence and depth of thought. But his life was not a smooth walk. Seneca lived surrounded by power and corruption. He was an advisor to emperors, tutor to Nero, one of the most cruel and unstable leaders Rome ever had. And even so, he managed to keep his voice firm before the court. While luxury, ostentation, and the pursuit of pleasure without limits reigned around him, he wrote about simplicity, moderation, and virtue. He knew that the empire could fall not only by the hands of external enemies, but by the internal decay of its citizens. The most interesting thing is that Seneca did not speak as a man isolated from temptations. He knew well the pleasures of power, money, status. His position in the Senate and in the court placed him before extravagant banquets, offered women easy riches. And yet in the midst of all this, he chose to warn. Unmeasured pleasure is poison. This was not just a philosophical theory. It was a warning from someone who saw in practice how addiction to ephemeral pleasures destroyed men who had everything, but ended up with nothing. And perhaps that is exactly why his words echo to this day. Because he did not speak from inside a cave isolated from the world. He spoke from within Rome itself, in the center of temptation, in the heart of corruption, and yet he chose to be a voice of reason. This makes his advice even more powerful, because it shows that it is possible to resist, even when everyone around gives in. When you read Seneca, you realize that he did not see pleasure as something to be eliminated completely, but as something that should be put in its proper place. Pleasure should be a consequence, not an objective. It should be a servant, not a master. The problem is not in feeling pleasure, but in being governed by it. This is the central point that connects his philosophy to our time. It is not the existence of pornography that destroys, but the slavery that it imposes when it becomes the center of a man's life. Seneca saw this clearly in his time, and today, if he could see how millions of men give hours, days, and even years to a screen that promises infinite pleasure, he would certainly repeat, "You are killing yourselves with something you think is life." Pleasure as a dangerous illusion. Now that we know who Seneca was, we need to understand his vision of pleasure. For him, immediate pleasure is like a poisoned candy. The sweetness deceives the senses, creates a feeling of relief and momentary satisfaction, but inside hides the seed of destruction. The man who lets himself be guided by it becomes, without realizing it, dependent on what weakens him. This metaphor of the poisoned candy is perfect to explain the logic of unmeasured pleasure. It presents itself as a gift, as a right that you believe you deserve after a hard day, as a well-deserved rest. But soon after tasting it comes the weight, the fatigue, the guilt. Immediate pleasure charges dearly, and almost always charges in the form of stolen vitality, lost mental clarity, wounded dignity. Seneca saw this in the daily life of Rome. He saw men indulging in banquets until vomiting, running after women as if they were slaves to their instincts, spending fortunes on games and luxuries that added nothing to their lives. And what was left afterwards? Tiredness, shame, emptiness. The same feeling that you, today, feel after a relapse in pornography. For a few minutes, it seems sweet, but soon after, the poison reveals itself. And here is the hardest truth. Uncontrolled pleasure not only weakens, it deceives. It makes you believe that you are satisfying yourself, when in reality you are emptying yourself. It promises life but delivers death in small doses. It's like drinking seawater. The more you consume, the thirstier you feel. Pleasure that knows no measure never satisfies. It only increases hunger. Seneca wrote, "Nothing is enough for whom enough is too little." This simple phrase summarizes the whole dilemma of modern man in the face of pornography. Because no matter how many videos you watch, how many hours you spend, how many new scenes you look for, it will never be enough. Pleasure without discipline is a prison without keys, because the more you give in, the more enslaved you become. This is the warning that Seneca leaves us. Uncontrolled pleasure is always an illusion. It arrives as a friend, but it is an enemy. It seems relief, but it is prison. It presents itself as sweet, but it is poison. And the only way to escape this cycle is to see beyond the immediate taste and realize the price that is being paid. Pornography as unmeasured pleasure. If in ancient Rome banquets, spectacles, and orgies represented excess, today the perfect portrait of unmeasured pleasure is pornography. Seneca never saw a screen, but if he saw what the industry of desire has become, he would not hesitate to point out, "It is here that humanity is destroying itself." Pornography is uncontrolled pleasure in its purest form. It has no end. There is always one more click, one more video, one more scene. It is an infinite source that never satisfies. It only demands more. And the more you consume, the emptier you become. The body gets tired, the mind dulls, the spirit fades. What seemed like freedom reveals itself as the cruelest of prisons, a prison in which you yourself put the chains and still smile while tightening them. For Seneca, this would be the ultimate example of unmeasured pleasure. He said that a man who does not control his desires becomes a slave, even if he lives in a palace. Today, millions of men live this modern slavery. Closed rooms, lit screens, hours lost in digital illusions. They are men who could be building, creating, living, but are trapped in a cycle of stimulus and emptiness, of excitement and guilt, of pleasure and decay. And it is important to understand, pornography does not only steal physical energy, it corrodes identity. It makes the man believe that he has no value outside of what he consumes. It hijacks his vision of relationships, distorts his idea of intimacy, weakens his discipline. It is the perfect translation of Seneca's phrase, "Unmeasured pleasure leads to ruin." Because this ruin does not arrive suddenly, but settles little by little, silently corroding until there remains only a tired, insecure, and empty man. Seneca would see pornography as a poison disguised as honey, something that seems harmless, even culturally accepted, but that inside destroys the structure of man. He would say that there is no difference between a slave chained in the market of Rome and a man chained to his impulses in front of a screen. Both have lost their freedom. Both have surrendered their dignity to desire. Both believe they are living, but in reality they only survive. Pornography is the decadent Rome of our era, and Seneca, if he were here, would not hesitate to shout, "You are killing yourselves from the inside out and calling it pleasure." The slavery of desire, Seneca repeatedly said that a man who does not master his desires is not free. And looking at the current reality, his words sound like a sentence, because there has never been a generation so free in appearance, but so enslaved in essence. Unbridled desire is an invisible prison. It starts small, a habit, a curiosity, a quick relief after a hard day. But when you realize it, you no longer choose. You are chosen. You no longer control. You are controlled. Pornography is the clearest example of this. The man believes that he is in command. After all, he decides when to watch, what to watch, how long to watch. But in reality, each choice has already been programmed by the desire that dominates him. He does not act of his own free will, but by compulsion. And what is the result of this slavery? Fragmented identity, destroyed discipline, wasted energy. The man who should be a warrior of his own life becomes a servant of impulses. He lives running after pleasure, but never finds peace. He lives feeding on stimuli, but never feels satisfied. It's like carrying invisible chains, but heavy enough to prevent any progress. Seneca warned that this type of slavery is worse than any physical chain, because whoever is imprisoned by bars knows that he is imprisoned and can desire freedom. But whoever is a slave to desire believes he is free, when in reality he is dominated. It is a prison disguised as choice. It is the cruelest type of servitude, the one in which the prisoner smiles while carrying chains. And here is the central point. As long as you are governed by lust, you are not your own master. You may have money, you may have status, you may even have social recognition, but inside, you are a servant. And a servant does not build his life, he only fulfills orders. In this case, orders imposed by his lowest instincts. Seneca would see the modern man trapped in pornography and say, "You have exchanged your freedom for glass shackles," because the chains are not made of iron, but of pixels, and yet they bind with the same force. And until you decide to break free, you will continue living as a slave, unable to reach your true greatness. Emotional and physical consequences. Seneca observed in Rome the effects of uncontrolled pleasure. Men who lived for banquets and parties but ended up sick, apathetic, empty. He saw that each excess brought a price, and that price was never cheap. 2,000 years later, science confirms what he already intuited. Unmeasured pleasure not only weakens the spirit, but destroys body and mind. Pornography, as a modern symbol of this excess, generates a chain of consequences that many pretend not to see. The first is emotional, anxiety. Men who consume pornography frequently develop restlessness, inability to relax, difficulty focusing on simple tasks. Because the brain, bombarded by artificial dopamine peaks, loses sensitivity to normal pleasures. Everything seems bland, everything seems tedious, everything seems smaller than the stimulus of the screen. Then comes the tiredness. It is not only the body that feels exhausted after hours in front of a screen, it is the soul that wears out. The man wakes up without will, spends the day dragged, as if he had lost something essential, because in fact, he has lost. He has lost vitality. The excess of pleasure steals energy from where it should be, at work, in study, in relationships, and this constant theft accumulates until the man lives as a shadow of himself. There is also the loss of focus. A brain conditioned to seek quick stimuli cannot withstand the discipline necessary for long tasks. That is why so many men report difficulty reading, studying, creating. Immediate pleasure destroys the ability to concentrate. The same Seneca who spoke of the importance of a clear mind would say today, "How can you think if you live slaves to excess?" And finally, there is physical decay. Pornography, consumed in excess, affects sleep, sexual energy, even the nervous system. Men report loss of vitality, difficulty in relating in a real way, a drop in self-esteem. Pleasure without discipline does not strengthen the body, it makes it sick. Seneca saw this in another way in his time, but the diagnosis is the same. Each uncontrolled pleasure charges dearly. Each excess steals a piece of life. The result is always the same: decay. And if Rome collapsed in part by surrendering to pleasure, how many men today are not collapsing for the same reason, only on an individual scale? The false sense of freedom. One of the greatest deceptions of pleasure is to make man believe that he is free when, in reality, he is imprisoned. Seneca said that no one is truly free if he is a slave to his desires, and pornography is the most cruel modern expression of this illusion. Ask any man who consumes pornography, "Why do you watch?" Most will answer, "Because I want to, because I can, because it's my choice." But is it really? If it were a choice, it would be enough to decide to stop. And yet, when they try to stop, they discover that they cannot. This is not freedom. This is prison. The false sense of freedom is the most dangerous poison because it blinds the victim. The man believes that he is in control when, in reality, he is manipulated by programmed impulses. He convinces himself that he is enjoying life when, in reality, he is surrendering his life to a cycle that consumes him. This is the prison that Seneca feared most, the invisible prison, where the prisoner believes he is Lord but is servant. And this illusion is reinforced by society. The modern world normalizes the consumption of pornography, presents it as something natural, even healthy. But the practical result is the opposite. It generates weak, insecure men, incapable of building real relationships without the energy to pursue their dreams. Calling this freedom is mocking the word itself. Seneca would say, "You are proud of what should cause shame," and he would be right. Because there is no freedom in being led by desires. There is no dignity in being controlled by impulses. There is no strength in depending on pleasures that empty you. This false freedom is like a circus show, lights, applause, colors, but behind the curtain, there are only chains. The man who believes he is free because he can click at any moment does not realize that in reality, he has lost the ability to choose truly. He does not choose when to stop. He does not choose what to watch. He does not choose how to live. He is chosen by the addiction, programmed by the pleasure, dominated by the excess. And until he faces this truth, he will continue to believe that he is in command, when, in reality, he is nothing more than a slave. Virtue as the true path. For Seneca, life should not be guided by pleasure but by virtue. This was the basis of Stoicism, not to run away from difficulties or seek gratification at all costs, but to choose the path of discipline, clarity, and purpose. He repeated, "Pleasure is treacherous, but virtue is reliable. Pleasure is fleeting, but virtue is eternal." Pornography is the opposite of that. It's cheap, immediate pleasure that never builds anything. Each relapse is a moment of satisfaction that leaves only exhaustion. Virtue, on the other hand, is shown in small acts of resistance. When you say no to desire, you are saying yes to freedom. When you resist the impulse, you prove to yourself that you are capable of governing your own life. This is the essence of virtue, self-mastery. For the Stoics, being virtuous was being free, because whoever governs himself cannot be dominated by anything external. The man who controls his desires is invincible, even if he loses external battles. The man who is dominated by pleasures, however, is already defeated, even if he has all the power in the world. And here's the point. Resisting pornography is not just a moral act, it's an act of survival. It's saying, "I'm not going to give my energy to something that weakens me." It's affirming, "I'm not going to let myself be led by instincts that degrade me." It's choosing to live according to reason and not as a slave to lust. Virtue is the true path because it gives meaning to the recovered energy. Pleasure without measure steals energy and leaves emptiness. Virtue channels energy and builds purpose. And that purpose, according to Seneca, is what makes life worth living. Resisting is not easy, but Seneca would remind us, nothing worthwhile is easy. Discipline hurts at first, but bears fruit that remains. Pleasure is sweet at first, but leaves poison that slowly corrodes. What do you choose for your life? The fleeting sweetness of pleasure or the lasting strength of virtue? The danger of always seeking more. One of Seneca's strongest warnings was against insatiable desire. He said, "Nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is little." This phrase, short and direct, summarizes the cycle of pornography and all uncontrolled pleasure. The more you seek, the emptier you become. Pornography is the perfect example of this. It never satisfies. One video leads to another, one scene leads to another, 1 hour leads to many. And in the end, no matter how much time you spend, there is always the feeling that you need more. This is the vicious circle. The more you consume, the more dissatisfied you become. The more you try to fill, the emptier you become. This desire for always more is the root of decadence, because man stops living in the present and starts living as a hunter of illusions. He does not appreciate what he has, does not value the real, does not find peace in the simple. He always needs new stimulus, always needs a stronger sensation, always needs something that never arrives. It is like a traveler walking in the desert in search of an oasis that does not exist. Seneca denounced exactly that in Rome. He saw men who possessed countless riches but were never satisfied. He saw leaders who had absolute power but lived anxious for more. The same happens today. Men who could build a solid life but waste hours on screens, always in search of new pleasure. And the more they seek, the more fragile they become. The danger of this cycle is not only in dissatisfaction, it is in the transformation of the mind. The brain, conditioned to always more, loses the ability to be content with little. What should be pleasure becomes addiction. What should be choice becomes compulsion. Man ceases to be human to become a slave to an appetite that can never be satisfied. This is the abyss that Seneca warns us to avoid, because whoever lives to seek always more never finds anything. Whoever gives himself to insatiable desire not only wastes time, but loses himself. One of the greatest deceptions of immediate pleasure is the feeling that it solves something. You believe you are finding relief, but afterwards there is only silence and emptiness. This logic always repeats itself. The promise is intense, but the result is fragile. And it is here that Seneca's philosophy becomes a mirror for each of us. He observed how the men of his time indulged in excesses, hoping to find life, but all they reaped was fatigue and regret. The same happens with pornography today. It promises pleasure but delivers exhaustion. It promises freedom but delivers prison. It promises energy but steals vitality. If you have already fallen into this cycle, you know what I am talking about. In the first minutes it seems sweet, but soon after comes the weight. You feel drained with a confused mind, with a heavy heart. It's as if you've been deceived once again. And this feeling of deception repeats itself so many times that at some point you start to wonder, why do I keep doing this? Seneca would say that it is because you have not yet learned to see immediate pleasure as an enemy. As long as you see it as a friend, you will continue to fall into the trap. As long as you believe that quick satisfaction can heal your pain, you will remain trapped. The change begins when you recognize the enemy for what it is, a sweet poison, which always charges dearly. And now I want you to reflect deeply. Have you already noticed how immediate pleasure always leaves emptiness afterwards? How many times have you sought relief and ended up weaker, more tired, more regretful? This is the question I want you to answer in the comments. Not just for me, but for yourself. Writing is assuming before the world what you already know inside. It is transforming a silent reflection into a public commitment. Answer with sincerity, because each of your words can be the proof that another man needs to realize that he is not alone. Your experience can be the spark that ignites the discipline of someone who is on the verge of giving up. So write, has immediate pleasure left you empty? If so, say it. This is your opportunity to break the silence and transform your fall into strength for another warrior. Resignifying pleasure. Seneca did not preach the complete elimination of pleasures. He did not say that life should be a dry desert without joy or satisfaction. On the contrary, he recognized that pleasure has a place, but only as a consequence, never as an objective. The problem is not feeling pleasure, but being governed by it. This is where the need to resignify pleasure comes in. Instead of leaving it as Lord, you place it as servant. Instead of seeking it as a goal, you receive it as a natural result of a life lived with discipline. This means that simple pleasures, a good meal, a sincere conversation, a well-done workout, a moment of silence, can be enjoyed without slavery. Pornography, however, distorts this logic. It transforms pleasure into obsession, desire into compulsion, and this destroys the ability to enjoy the real pleasures of life. A man trapped in digital addiction does not find joy in small things. He does not feel satisfaction in what is simple. He lives anesthetized, always in search of stronger stimulus. Resignifying pleasure is recovering the sense of proportion. It is remembering that pleasure is not an enemy, but it is also not king. That true joy is born when you live in balance, when you do not let yourself be dragged by every impulse. When pleasure is placed in its proper place, it ceases to be poison and returns to be healthy sweetness. Seneca would say, "It is not pleasure that needs to be destroyed, but its tyranny." What you need to break is not the ability to feel, but the dependence on feeling at every moment. When pleasure returns to being a consequence and not a goal, you rediscover freedom. This is the central point. Do not live for pleasure, but allow pleasure to live for you. Serve yourself with it when it comes naturally, but never seek it as if it were your reason for existing. This is true Stoic discipline. Seneca and the present. If there is a phrase of Seneca that seems written for today, it is this: nothing is enough for the man to whom enough is little. He had no computer, no internet, never heard of pornography, but he understood, 2,000 years ago, the logic that destroys our generation. The essence of modern addiction is exactly that. It is never enough. You watch one video and soon want another. You seek one type of stimulus, and in a short time, it is no longer enough. You need something more explicit, more intense, more different. It is an endless staircase which never leads to the top. It is like drinking seawater. The more you drink, the thirstier you feel. Seneca saw the same dynamic in Rome. He observed men who possessed everything that money could buy: gold, lands, slaves, banquets, women, and even so were always dissatisfied. They always sought more, without realizing that this more distanced them from peace. He denounced, "You do not live, you only exist running after pleasures that dissolve like smoke." And today, if we look at ourselves, the image is identical. Millions of men spend hours every day in front of screens, consuming scenes that promise pleasure. But the more they consume, the emptier they become. The more they seek, the weaker they become. The mind gets used to quick and intense stimuli, and the real world loses its grace. Conversations seem boring. Relationships seem laborious. Everyday life seems tasteless. Because the brain has been trained to seek fireworks and no longer recognizes the beauty of the simple flame of a candle. This is Seneca's central point. When enough is never enough, life becomes prison. The modern man who consumes pornography without limit is equal to the Roman patrician who sank into orgies and banquets. Both believed they were living the most of life, when in reality they were only destroying themselves little by little. And what makes this truth even more cruel is that, deep down, every man knows this. He knows that he is not satisfied. He knows that that pleasure is not real. He knows that he is deceiving himself, but he chooses to continue because he is afraid to face the emptiness that awaits him when the stimulus disappears. It is like a sick man who continues drinking poison because he cannot bear the silence of abstinence. If Seneca were alive today, he would look at this generation and say, "You are no different from the Romans I criticized. You have only exchanged glasses of wine and parties for pixels. The essence is the same, pleasure without measure, emptiness without end." And he would complete. He who is a slave to his desires, even sitting on a throne, is less free than the poorest of men who governs himself. Therefore, this block is more than reflection. It is a mirror. Every time you seek pornography, you are proving Seneca's truth. You are demonstrating that nothing is enough for you. And as long as that is your path, there will never be peace. Call to virtue. Seneca never tired of repeating, "The path of the free man is not pleasure, but virtue." And here it is necessary to understand that virtue for the Stoics was not a vague or religious word. Virtue was practical strength, it was discipline, it was courage, it was the power to govern oneself. For us, applying this to modern addiction, the message is clear. If pornography is the poison, virtue is the antidote. Each act of discipline is a drop of cure against excess. Each no said to desire is a brick placed on the wall of freedom. Each day resisted is a victory that no one can steal. Seneca did not deny that pleasure has its place. He knew that simple pleasures, good food, company of friends, moments of silence, are part of life. But for him, the difference is that pleasure should be a consequence, never an objective. The man who lives seeking pleasure gets lost. The man who lives seeking virtue finds peace, and pleasure comes as a natural fruit of this well-lived life. And it is here that we need to reflect. How many times have you exchanged the chance to build something real for minutes of illusion? How many times have you wasted energy that could have been used to train, study, love, serve, create, just to satisfy an impulse? Pornography steals not only time but destiny. It kidnaps your creative energy and transforms it into ashes. Virtue returns that energy to the right place. Virtue is waking up and fulfilling the word you gave yourself. Virtue is looking at temptation and resisting. Virtue is transforming accumulated energy into real progress. And this virtue, when practiced, becomes a deeper pleasure than any stimulus, the pleasure of freedom. Seneca would say, "The man who lives by virtue is never a slave. He who lives by pleasure will always be." This is the choice before you today. Remain a slave to pixels or become master of yourself. Live running after stimuli or live building something bigger. Seek immediate pleasure or reap the lasting peace of discipline. And remember, true pleasure is not the one that burns quickly, but the one that remains. True pleasure is not excess, but balance. It is not compulsion, but freedom. This is the joy that is born when you free yourself. This is the happiness that flourishes when you choose virtue. Therefore, receive this call with seriousness. Seek virtue. Put pleasure in its proper place. Make discipline your weapon, courage your companion, freedom your goal. Because in the end, the question will not be, how much pleasure did you have, but how much of yourself did you really govern? Pleasure always presents itself as a friend. It knocks on your door with a smiling face, a soft voice, and a promise of relief. It dresses in honey, in sweet wine, in seductive music. But behind this disguise, it carries a hidden blade. Because all pleasure without measure is treacherous. It promises life, but delivers death in small doses. It promises freedom, but places invisible shackles. It promises energy, but drains every last drop of vitality. Seneca, 2,000 years ago, called this poison a sweet poison, capable of deceiving even the strongest men. And if in ancient Rome this poison manifested itself in endless banquets, orgies, and limitless luxuries, today it is concentrated in something even more insidious. Pornography, a digital poison, accessible at any time, unlimited, capable of corroding entire generations in silence. What most men do not realize is that this poison does not kill quickly. It kills slowly. It infiltrates the soul like a daily drop of toxin. In the beginning, it seems like nothing. After a week, it already corrodes thoughts. After a few months, it drains energy. After years, it destroys identity. And the worst, many only realize when they have already lost their youth, their relationships, their confidence, their dreams. This poison acts on several fronts. In the body, it generates fatigue, apathy, dysfunctions. In the mind, it creates anxiety, confusion, inability to focus. In the spirit, it brings shame, guilt, a feeling of always being in debt to oneself. It is as if each dose of immediate pleasure left an invisible scar, until the man no longer recognizes himself. And what makes the poison so dangerous is that it presents itself as freedom. You can see what you want when you want. This is the lie. The man believes he is in control, but when he tries to stop, he discovers that he cannot. He thinks he is free, but he is a prisoner. He thinks he chooses, but he is chosen. This is the slavery that Seneca feared most, the one in which the prisoner smiles while carrying chains. And now, I want to speak directly to you. How many times have you felt this poison running in your veins? How many times have you sought pleasure and minutes later felt drained, weak, ashamed? How many times have you promised yourself that it would be the last time and fallen again? How many opportunities have you lost because you were trapped in this invisible current? How many days of energy, how many nights of sleep, how many real chances to live have you given to this poison? This is the moment of truth. You need to decide whether you will continue drinking from this poisoned cup or if you will knock it to the ground and break the cycle. Because pleasure without measure will never be a friend. It is an enemy in disguise. And as long as you believe in his lie, you will continue living as a slave. But there is an antidote, and that antidote is discipline. It is virtue. It is the ability to say no to the impulse and yes to your freedom. It is the strength to look inside yourself and affirm, I will not betray myself anymore. Each act of resistance is a drop of cure. Each day one is a dose of medicine. Each week of discipline is a transfusion of new life. Seneca said that virtue is the only true good, because pleasure passes, money passes, power passes, but virtue remains. Virtue does not depend on anything external. It is yours. No one can take it from you. When you choose discipline instead of cheap pleasure, you are choosing to be master of yourself. And that mastery is the greatest power a man can achieve. Imagine the difference. On one side, the man poisoned by pleasure, tired, apathetic, bent over. On the other, the man who chose virtue, firm gaze, erect posture, energy overflowing. A slave and a master, both with the same body, both living in the same time, but with opposite destinies. The choice is made every day, and the decision is yours. And here I want to leave you with questions that are not rhetorical, but invitations to reflection. Until when will you drink from this poison? Until when will you exchange your freedom for invisible chains? Until when will you live half of a life when you could live in fullness? You were born for much more than minutes of digital pleasure. You were born to build, to mark, to lead, to live with dignity. Do not waste this on cheap poison. Therefore, I ask you now for two simple but powerful actions. First, subscribe to this channel, because this series is the voice that will remind you every day to protect your freedom. Each episode is an antidote against the poison. Second, comment below the word virtue. Write it in capital letters like a war cry, like a public declaration that you no longer accept being a slave to pleasure. And remember, the poison of pleasure is sweet, but it kills. Discipline may be bitter at first, but it saves. And if you have come this far, you have already taken the first step to free yourself. And that was the video I prepared for you. But the fight does not end here. The next episode is already appearing on your screen now. Click and come with me, because each step you take in the direction of virtue is one more drop of antidote against the poison that threatens your life.